Good evening. Tonight we enter a world far from comfort, a world of deep woods, whispered words, and childhood dreams that curdle into nightmares. We are opening a dusty, leather-bound book to uncover the stories you think you know. Forget the gentle princess and the happily ever after the storybook sold you. The truth is, the original tales were not meant to comfort. They were meant to warn. So, before you get comfortable, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely find value in these journeys into the past. And do let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It is always a privilege to know who is joining us from around the world. Now, find a comfortable position. Dim the lights. And let's ease into tonight's chronicle together. Close your eyes for a moment. Let the noise of your world fade away and allow an image to form in the quiet theatre of your mind. Picture a child's bedroom bathed in the soft, warm glow of a bedside lamp. A child tucked securely under a heavy quilt, their face full of sleepy, trusting innocence. Beside the bed sits a parent, their voice a gentle, soothing murmur, reading from a large, beautifully illustrated book. The pages are thick and glossy, filled with vibrant colors. Let's look closer at the world on those pages. It is a world of impossible kindness. We see a princess whose only flaw is her own gentle nature. Her sadness is temporary and picturesque, expressed through a single, perfect tear. Her voice is so beautiful that when she sings, small woodland creatures flock to her side. Bluebirds tie ribbons in her hair, and friendly mice become her personal tailors. Her problems, as grave as they may seem, are simple, external things. A lost glass slipper, a cruel but ultimately foolish stepmother, a sleep that can be broken by a simple kiss. She is not a person. She is an ideal, a passive figure, waiting for her story to happen to her. And then there is the prince. He is not a character. He is a solution, arriving on a magnificent white horse, as if summoned by destiny. His heroism is effortless. He is required only to be charming, handsome, and brave for a single, climactic scene. He fights a dragon that is more of a nuisance than a true terror. He cuts through a hedge of thorns with a single, noble swing of his sword. He is a reward for the princess's virtue, his personality as flawless and as shallow as his perfect smile. His true love's kiss is a magical key, a simple solution to the most complex of curses. Even the villains of this world are comforting in their simplicity. The evil queen is motivated by a cartoonish vanity. The witch in the woods is a comical ogress, easily outsmarted by the clever children she wishes to eat. Their evil has no real weight, no lasting stain. They are temporary obstacles on the path to an inevitable, foregone conclusion. Their defeat is total, and often they are simply banished or disappear, their darkness vanishing from the world as quickly as it appeared. This is the promise of the modern fairy tale. It is a world where the forests are enchanted rather than terrifying, where every problem has a simple, magical solution, and where the ending is always the same. It is a promise, whispered in the quiet of the nursery, a guarantee that all suffering is temporary, that good will always triumph, and that everyone, absolutely everyone, will live happily ever after. This is the story we know, a world of comfort, of moral clarity, of gentle dreams. It is a beautiful, seductive, and powerful story. But this is a lie. It is a comforting fiction, told to shield children from a truth that is far too horrifying to contemplate. It is a story scrubbed clean of its original darkness, its ink washed pale over generations, its pages stripped of their blood and tears, until only a faint, hollow echo of the original tale remains. To find the truth, we must leave the child's warm, lamplit bedroom and travel back in time to a place of profound and terrifying darkness. We must travel to the world that birthed these stories, the world of medieval and early modern Europe. Imagine not a soft bed, but a pile of dirty straw in the corner of a one-room peasant hut, a home shared with the family goat. Imagine not a full belly, but the gnawing, constant ache of hunger from a failed harvest, where the only meal is a thin, watery gruel made from boiled oats. Imagine a world without medicine, where the Black Death has carried away half your village, and a simple fever in your child is a potential death sentence. This was a world steeped in fear. The deep, dark woods at the edge of the village were not a place of friendly animals, but a place of real wolves and real bandits. It was a place where people vanished. The authority was not a kind king in a distant castle, but a brutal local lord who could demand your labor, your food, and your life on a whim. The world was small, dark, and filled with a deep, unshakable belief in the supernatural, in curses, in witchcraft, in the tangible, malevolent presence of evil lurking just beyond the firelight. The people of this world did not tell stories to comfort their children. They told stories to arm them. They were not lullabies, they were warnings, brutal life lessons passed down through generations. They were survival guides for a world where trusting a stranger could get you killed, where vanity and greed led to horrific punishments, and where the line between survival and starvation was perilously thin. Don't stray from the path was not a gentle piece of advice. It was a desperate plea to avoid being eaten by a real wolf. Don't take food from a stranger's house was not a lesson in manners. It was a warning against the very real possibility of being fattened for the slaughter. The punishments in these tales were not neat and tidy. They were a reflection of the brutal justice of the era. We will find that Cinderella's sisters paid for their vanity, not with social embarrassment, but with their own flesh and blood. We will discover that Snow White's stepmother was not just a narcissist, but a cannibalistic monster whose end was a spectacle of unimaginable torture. And we will learn that Rapunzel's youthful romance led not to a wedding, but to mutilation and years of desolate, lonely suffering. Tonight, we will open that dusty original collection. We will not be following a single hero, but instead, we will explore the true, twisted, and terrifying origins of 3 stories you only think you know. Our first story tonight is perhaps the most beloved of all. It is a tale that has become a cornerstone of our collective imagination, a blueprint for the very idea of a fairy tale ending. It is the story of Cinderella. Let us first summon the version we know, the one polished by time and animation. It is a gentle story, at its heart. A story of a kind and beautiful girl, unjustly mistreated, whose sorrow is a picturesque and temporary state. Her problems are solved not by her own hand, but by a whimsical, almost comical magic. A fairy godmother appears in a shower of starlight, a cheerful, grandmotherly figure who, with a wave of her wand and a few nonsense words, transforms the mundane into the magnificent. A pumpkin becomes a golden carriage, mice become noble steeds, rags become a ball gown of impossible, shimmering beauty. It is a story where magic is a delightful, convenient solution, a force of pure benevolence that exists to reward virtue. Cinderella's triumph is clean, her forgiveness of her stepsisters is swift, and her happily ever after is absolute. It is a perfect and comforting dream. Now, let that dream dissolve. Let the sparkling magic fade, and the warm colors turn to the cold, hard gray of reality. For the story we are about to tell is not a dream. It is a nightmare, rooted in the cold earth of a mother's grave. Our story begins not with a wish, but with a death. A wealthy man's wife lay on her deathbed. The winter was drawing in, and she could feel the last of her strength ebbing away with the fading light. She called her only daughter to her side. A girl whose heart was as good as the world was about to become cruel. "Dear child," she whispered, her voice as thin as a dry leaf, "remain pious and good. Then the dear Lord will always protect you, and I will look down on you from heaven and be near you." And with that, she closed her eyes, and the first shadow fell upon the girl's life. The girl was devout in her grief. Every day, she went to her mother's grave and wept, her tears watering the cold earth. She remained good and pious, just as she had promised. But promises, she would soon learn, offer little protection against the cruelties of the living. Winter passed, and the snow melted, revealing the green shoots of a new season. And with the new season came a new wife for her father. The man, eager to erase the memory of his sorrow, brought a new woman into his house. And she, in turn, brought her 2 daughters with her into the home. They were beautiful on the surface. Their faces were fair, their clothes were fine, but their hearts were as black and as hard as cold stones. And with their arrival, the true winter began for the young girl. They looked upon her, with her fine clothes and her gentle nature, and they saw a thing to be broken. "Why should this stupid goose sit in the parlor with us?" they sneered. "He who wants to eat bread must earn it. Out with the kitchen maid." They ripped her beautiful dresses from her body, forced her into an old grey smock and a pair of rough wooden shoes. They laughed as they banished her to the kitchen, a world of grease, soot, and endless, thankless labor. Her suffering was immediate and total. She was forced to do the heaviest work from dawn until dusk. She rose before the sun to haul water and light the fires. She cooked and washed for the others, and when the day was done, she had no bed to sleep in. She was forced to lie in the cinders next to the hearth, a place of warmth, yes, but also of filth. Her clothes were always dirty, her face perpetually smudged with soot. And because she always looked so dusty and dirty, they gave her a new name. They did not call her by her given name. They called her Aschenputtel, Cinderella, the Cinder Maid. This is the grim foundation of our story. And here, in this place of sorrow, we find no fairy godmother. There is no benevolent, magical figure waiting in the wings. There is only the ghost of a mother's promise and a small, resilient tree. For when the father once prepared to go to the fair, he asked his 2 stepdaughters what he should bring them. One wanted beautiful dresses, the other pearls and jewels. Then he turned to Cinderella. "And you, Aschenputtel," he said, "what will you have?" "Father," she said, her voice quiet, "the first branch that knocks against your hat on your way home, break it off for me." He did as she asked. On his return, a hazel branch brushed against his hat, and he broke it off and brought it home. She did not take it as a simple gift. She took it to her mother's grave and planted it there, watering it not with water, but with her own constant, bitter tears. The branch took root, and it grew. It grew into a beautiful hazel tree, and Cinderella would go to it 3 times every day to weep and to pray. And each time she did, a little white bird would come and land on the tree. And if she expressed a wish, the bird would throw down to her what she had wished for. This was her magic. It was not the whimsical, sparkling magic of a wand. It was a strange, dark magic, born of grief, rooted in death, and nurtured by a daughter's unending sorrow. Cinderella's life settled into a rhythm of relentless, grinding toil. The world, which had once been a place of comfort and love, had shrunk to the 4 soot-stained walls of the kitchen. Her existence was a testament to the quiet, systematic cruelty that can flourish behind the closed doors of a respectable home. Her father, the man who should have been her protector, was a ghost in his own house. He saw her degradation, her exhaustion, her sorrow, but he did nothing. Perhaps he was weak. Perhaps he was afraid of his new wife. Or perhaps, in his desire to build a new life, he simply found it easier to forget the living reminder of his old one. Whatever the reason, his silence was a daily act of betrayal, a quiet confirmation to his daughter that she was utterly, completely alone. Her days were a blur of identical, grueling tasks. She was the first to rise, her small body shivering in the pre-dawn chill of the kitchen. Her first task was always the fire. On her hands and knees, she would blow on the embers from the night before, her face smarting from the smoke, until a small flame caught. Then she would haul heavy buckets of water from the well, her arms straining, the cold water splashing onto her rough wooden shoes, seeping in to numb her feet. She was the household's beast of burden. She scrubbed the floors until her knees were raw. She washed the endless piles of laundry in harsh, lye soap that left her hands chapped and bleeding. She cooked the meals, the smell of the fine food for her step-family, a sharp contrast to the meager crust of bread she was allowed for herself. She was to be invisible, but the evidence of her labor had to be everywhere. The floors must be spotless, the clothes immaculate, the meals perfect. Any flaw, any mistake, was met not with gentle correction, but with a sharp word, a cruel laugh, or a thrown object. Her stepsisters, in particular, took a special, inventive pleasure in her misery. They would deliberately create work for her, a game to pass their idle hours. They would dump buckets of clean lentils and peas into the ashes of the hearth, and then command her to pick them out again, one by one. It was a task of maddening, pointless tedium, designed not for any purpose, but simply to remind her of her powerlessness, to force her to spend hours on her knees in the filth, her fingers growing numb while they sat in the parlor, practicing their music and laughing at her expense. They saw her not as a sister, but as a thing, an object upon which they could pour all their own vanity and discontent. They would mock her appearance, calling her Ashenputtel the Sooty, pulling at her worn-out grey smock. They would taunt her with stories of the fine parties they were to attend, describing the silks and jewels they would wear, all while she sat, silent, in her corner by the hearth. In this world of constant abuse, her only solace was the world beyond the kitchen door. The moments she could steal to visit her mother's grave were the only moments of peace in her life. She would kneel beneath the hazel tree, her one true inheritance, and she would weep. The tears were not just of sadness, but of a profound, crushing loneliness. And as she wept, the birds would come. This was her only true family now, the little white bird that lived in the tree, and the other birds of the sky, the turtle doves, the pigeons. They seemed to understand her sorrow. She would speak to them, her voice a quiet whisper, telling them of her hardships, and they would listen, their heads cocked, their small, dark eyes watching her with a strange intelligence. When her stepsisters had thrown the lentils into the ash, she had gone to the garden and called out in a low, sad voice, "You tame pigeons, you turtle doves, and all you birds under heaven, come and help me to pick the good into the pot, the bad into the crop." And they had come. First 2 pigeons, then the turtle doves, and finally a cloud of birds, swarming into the kitchen through the open window. They descended upon the hearth, their small heads bobbing, and with a quiet, determined industry, they sorted the lentils, grain by grain, until the task was done. This was the nature of her magic. It was a quiet, earthy magic, born from a deep, almost instinctual connection to the natural world. It was the magic of the overlooked, the gentle, the creatures who, like her, lived a life close to the ground. There were no wands, no grand transformations. There was only the quiet loyalty of the birds and the steadfast presence of the tree on her mother's grave. It was a magic that did not erase her suffering, but simply gave her the strength to endure it. It was a fragile shield against a world of relentless cruelty, a small, secret hope she nourished in the ashes of her life. For years, this was the unchanging landscape of Cinderella's life, a world of grey, broken only by the quiet green of the hazel tree and the flutter of soft wings. But a kingdom cannot remain in stasis forever. One day, a proclamation rings out, carried by riders to every corner of the land. The king was to hold a great festival, one that would last for 3 whole days. All the beautiful young maidens of the country were invited, for it was the king's deepest wish that his son, the prince, should choose a bride from among them. The news descended upon Cinderella's house like a bolt of lightning. For the 2 stepsisters, it was a call to arms. Their lives, once a placid sea of idle cruelty, were now consumed by a single, frantic purpose. Their excitement was a sharp, ugly thing, a flurry of commands and complaints that filled the house with a new kind of noise. Dresses were ordered, ribbons were chosen, shoes were polished. The house became a theatre of their ambition, and Cinderella was the sole, exhausted stagehand for their grand performance. She was commanded to brush their hair until it shone, to lace their corsets so tightly they could barely breathe, to polish their shoes until she could see her own tired, smudged face in their reflection. She endured their endless preening, their sharp criticisms, their giddy, cruel chatter about the prince and the ball. They spoke of the dances they would have, the glances they would share, the fortune that awaited the one the prince would choose. And as she worked, her hands busy but her heart heavy, a small, fragile, and almost forgotten feeling began to stir within her. It was a flicker of desire, a wish to see the festival for herself, to just for a moment stand in the light and see the splendor. Finally, her work complete, the sisters standing before her like 2 magnificent cruel peacocks, Cinderella gathered her courage. With a trembling voice, she went to her stepmother and asked if she, too, might be allowed to go to the ball. The stepmother looked at her, a long, appraising stare that took in the soot on her face, the grime on her smock, the weariness in her eyes. A slow, contemptuous smile spread across her face. "You, Aschenputtel," she sneered. "You are covered in dust and dirt. How can you go to a festival? You have no clothes and no shoes, and yet you want to dance." But Cinderella persisted, her quiet plea a small act of rebellion. The stepmother, seeing a new opportunity for a cruel game, paused. She then went to the hearth, took up a large dish, and poured a full measure of lentils into the ashes. "There," she said, her voice dripping with false generosity. "If you can pick these lentils out of the ashes for me in 2 hours, you shall go with us." It was an impossible task, a cruel joke designed to crush the last ember of hope in the girl's heart. Cinderella, her eyes filling with tears, went out through the back door into the garden and called out her familiar, sorrowful plea. "You tame pigeons, you turtle doves, and all you birds under heaven, come and help me to pick the good into the pot, the bad into the crop." As before, they came. The 2 white pigeons flew in first, followed by the others, a great, whirring cloud of wings. They descended upon the hearth and began to work, their small heads bobbing with a silent, hypnotic rhythm. Pick, 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 pick. They sorted the good lentils into the dish, and in less than an hour, the task was complete. The birds flew away, and Cinderella, her heart now beating with a wild, fragile hope, took the dish to her stepmother, believing she had finally earned her chance. The stepmother was shocked, but her cruelty was a deep and unshakable well. "No, Aschenputtel," she said, her smile returning. "You have no clothes, and you cannot dance. You will only be laughed at." And when Cinderella began to weep, the stepmother, as if struck by a sudden inspiration, offered an even greater cruelty. She took 2 full dishes of lentils and poured them into the ashes. "If you can pick them all out in 1 hour," she said, "you shall go." She thought to herself that she will never be able to do. Cinderella went once more to the garden and made her desperate call to the birds. They came as before, a feathered army of helpers, and they descended upon the ashes. And in less than an hour, the work was done. The dishes were full, not a single bad grain among them. The girl, now filled with a certainty that there could be no more excuses, brought the dishes to her stepmother. But the stepmother's heart was a fortress against compassion. "It is no use," she said, her voice final and sharp. "You cannot go with us, for you have no clothes and cannot dance. We should be ashamed of you." And with that, she turned her back, and taking her 2 proud daughters with her, she swept out of the house, leaving Cinderella alone in the silence, staring into a hearth full of cold, empty ash. The glimmer of hope was gone, and the darkness that remained was deeper than ever before. The sound of the departing carriage faded into the distance, leaving behind a silence in the house that was heavier and more profound than any noise. Cinderella was alone. Not just alone in the kitchen, but alone in the world. Her one small hope crushed under the heel of her stepmother's casual cruelty. She sat by the hearth, the tears she had held back now streaming freely down her soot-stained cheeks, her body shaking with silent, desperate sobs. All was lost. The festival would begin, the prince would dance, and she would remain here, a creature of ash and sorrow. When she had no more tears to weep, a quiet resolve settled in her heart. She would go not to the festival, but to the one place of solace she had left. She went out to the garden, to the grave of her mother. She stood beneath the hazel tree, its leaves rustling gently in the evening breeze, a sound like a comforting whisper. And she made her plea, not to the birds this time, but to the tree itself, to the spirit of the mother who lay beneath it. She called out, her voice still thick with tears, "Shiver and quiver, my little tree. Silver and gold throw down over me." And then the magic happened, not with a flash of light or a crack of smoke. It was a quiet, earthy magic. The little white bird that lived in the tree suddenly appeared on a branch above her, and from the branch, it let something fall. It was a dress more magnificent than any she had ever imagined, a gown that seemed to be woven from moonlight and silver thread, and beside it, a pair of slippers, embroidered with silk and shimmering with silver. Her heart pounding, Cinderella quickly washed the soot and grime from her face and hands. She shed her rough grey smock, the uniform of her servitude, and put on the magnificent gown. It felt impossibly soft against her skin. When she looked at her reflection in a pail of water, she did not see Aschenputtel the Cinder Maid. She saw a princess, a stranger of breathtaking beauty. She hurried to the festival. When she entered the great hall, a sudden hush fell over the crowd. No one recognized her. Her stepsisters and stepmother were there, of course, and they saw her, but they assumed she must be some foreign princess. So impossible was it for them to imagine that this radiant creature could be the dirty girl they had left behind in the cinders. The prince himself was captivated. From the moment he saw her, he had eyes for no other. He walked towards her, his own courtiers and admirers forgotten. He took her hand, and it felt as if a current of electricity passed between them. "This is my partner," he declared to the room. He would not let go of her hand. They danced together for hours, a blur of silver and gold in the candlelight. If anyone else asked her to dance, the prince would say, with a firm and final authority, "She is my partner." Cinderella, who had never known such attention, such grace, felt as if she were living in a dream. She forgot the kitchen, the ashes, the cruelty. For these few precious hours, she was not Aschenputtel. She was a princess, and she was cherished. But as the evening wore on, a small part of her knew this dream could not last. When it was time to leave, she wished to go. The prince, desperate not to lose her, offered to escort her home, but she slipped away from him so quickly and so gracefully that he could not follow. She ran back to her father's house, back to the garden, and back to the hazel tree. She stood beneath its branches once more. Shiver and quiver, my little tree. Take the clothes back from me. The white bird descended, took the beautiful dress, and flew away. Cinderella, now dressed again in her old grey soot-stained smock, went into the kitchen, lay down in the cinders, and lit a small oil lamp. She was once again Aschenputtel. When the stepmother and her daughters returned from the festival, they were full of stories of the mysterious, beautiful princess. The prince danced only with her, they said, their voices a mixture of awe and envy. We wonder who she can be. They looked at Cinderella, lying in the dark, and saw only the familiar sight of the dirty kitchen maid. She could not have been you, they thought, and content in their own superiority, they went to bed. Cinderella listened in silence. She did not correct them. She let the embers of the fire die down, the secret of the silver dress held close in her heart, a single, warm coal in the cold ashes of her life. The second day arrived, a mirror of the first. Cinderella's father went to the festival with his wife and 2 stepdaughters, leaving her behind with her tears and her impossible tasks. Once they were gone, she went again to her mother's grave, to the hazel tree that was her only confidant. And she made her plea once more. Shiver and quiver, my little tree, silver and gold throw down over me. The little white bird appeared as before, but this time, the dress it brought was even more magnificent than the last. If the first was woven from moonlight, this one was spun from the sun itself. It was a gown of pure, shimmering gold, so radiant it seemed to glow with its own inner light. And with it came a pair of slippers, not of silver, but of pure, gleaming gold. When she arrived at the festival, the astonishment was even greater than the night before. She was a vision of impossible splendor. The prince, who had been waiting for her with a desperate, impatient heart, rushed to her side. He took her hand and refused to let it go for the entire evening. He danced only with her, his eyes never leaving her face, his fascination deepening into a profound obsession. He was a man bewitched, utterly captivated by this beautiful, mysterious princess who seemed to have appeared from nowhere. Again, when the evening drew to a close, Cinderella slipped away from him, running back to the safety of her garden and the magic of the hazel tree. She returned the golden dress and was once again Aschenputtel, asleep in the cinders, when her stepfamily returned, their heads full of breathless tales of the golden princess and the prince's deepening infatuation. On the third and final day of the festival, the pattern repeated, but this time, when Cinderella stood beneath the hazel tree and made her wish, the dress the bird threw down was the most spectacular of all. It was made of a fabric that seemed to shine like the stars in the night sky, a constellation of glittering jewels woven into the cloth, and the slippers that came with it were not of silver or gold, but of a material just as precious and far more delicate. They were slippers of pure, clear glass. She entered the great hall, and the entire court was left speechless. She was no longer just a princess. She was a celestial vision, a creature from a higher realm. The prince, now utterly consumed by his desire to know who she was more determined than ever not to let her escape. He danced with her, held her hand, and as the night wore on, he put his plan into motion. He had commanded his servants to coat the entire palace staircase with sticky pitch. It was a desperate, clever trap designed to ensnare his mysterious love, to prevent her from vanishing into the night as she had done twice before. When Cinderella decided it was time to leave, she turned to run, as usual. But as she fled down the staircase, her left slipper became stuck fast in the thick black pitch. She could not stop to retrieve it, for the prince was close behind. She left it there, a single, perfect glass slipper, and ran out into the darkness, back to the safety of her tree. She returned the star-spangled dress and resumed her life as Aschenputtel. But this time, something was different. She had left a piece of her magical life behind in the real world. The prince, thwarted but triumphant, came to the staircase and found the slipper. He picked it up. It was small, delicate, and exquisitely made. It was his only clue. Holding it, he made a solemn vow before his entire court. "No one shall be my wife," he declared, "but she whose foot this golden slipper fits." But here, a small detail is often misremembered, for the slipper was not gold. It was clear as water, fragile as a dream. The storytellers, perhaps, thought gold was a more fitting material for a prince's quest, a more tangible treasure. But the truth of the slipper was in its transparency, its delicacy. It was a thing that could not hide any flaws, and it was a thing that could be easily shattered. The quest had begun, the trap had been sprung, and the prince, holding his one fragile clue, was now on a collision course with the brutal reality of Cinderella's world. The prince's quest became the obsession of the kingdom. The story of the mysterious princess and her lost slipper was on everyone's lips. And so, he began his search, the small glass shoe in his hand, a fragile key he hoped would unlock the identity of his love. He went from castle to castle, from manor to manor, commanding every maiden to try on the slipper. But it was no use. It was too small for some, too narrow for others. The slipper, it seemed, belonged to no one. Finally, the prince and his royal retinue arrived at the house of Cinderella's father. He demanded that the two daughters of the house be brought forth to try the slipper. The two stepsisters' hearts beat fast with a vicious, triumphant excitement. This was their moment. They were beautiful, they had fine feet, and they were determined that one of them would be the bride. The eldest sister was brought to the prince first. She took the slipper and went with her mother into the bedroom to try it on. She tried to force her foot inside, but it was no use. Her big toe was too large, it simply would not fit. She grunted with effort, her face turning red, but the delicate glass would yield no further. Her mother, standing beside her, saw the frustration and the dawning despair on her daughter's face. And in that moment, the true, cold darkness of her heart was revealed. Her ambition for her child was a monstrous thing, a force that knew no morality, no boundary, no limit. She looked at her daughter's foot, at the offending toe, and then she handed her a sharp, gleaming knife. "Here," she said, her voice a low, chilling whisper. "Cut off the toe. When you are queen, you will have no more need to go on foot." The words hung in the silent room. It was not a suggestion. It was a command to mutilate oneself for the sake of power. The daughter, her own ambition as sharp as the blade, looked at the knife, at her foot, and at the golden prospect of a crown. And she did it. She cut off her own toe. The pain must have been blinding, but she suppressed a scream, biting down on her lip until it bled. She then forced her mangled, bleeding foot into the glass slipper, the blood beginning to pool inside it. She hobbled out to the prince, her face a pale mask of forced composure. The prince, seeing that the slipper fit, felt a surge of relief. He had found his bride. Without a second thought, he declared she was the one, lifted her onto his horse, and began to ride away with her towards the castle and their new life. But as they passed the garden, as they rode by the hazel tree on Cinderella's mother's grave, the two little pigeons who were perched there cooed out in a clear sing-song voice. "Turn and peep, turn and peep. There's blood within the shoe. The shoe it is too small for her. The true bride waits for you." The prince heard them. He looked down, and he saw it. The bright scarlet blood streaming from the slipper, staining the pure white stocking. He saw the deception. His face hardened with fury. This was not his beautiful princess. This was an impostor, a butcher of her own flesh. He turned his horse around, rode back to the house in a cold rage, and returned the deceitful bride to her mother. "This is not the one," he said, his voice like ice. "Let the other sister try on the shoe." And so, the second sister was brought forth. She took the slipper and went with her mother to try it on. Her foot fit more easily, but this time her heel was too wide. She could not force it in. And once again, the mother, her ambition undeterred by the first failure, handed her the knife. "Cut off a piece of your heel," she commanded. "When you are queen, you will have no more need to go on foot." And the second daughter, as desperate and as cruel as the first, obeyed. She sliced away a piece of her own heel, the pain a white-hot fire, and forced her bleeding foot into the shoe. She came out to the prince, her face pale but smiling, and he, once again deceived, lifted her onto his horse and rode away. And once again, as they passed the hazel tree, the two pigeons cooed their warning. "Turn and peep, turn and peep. There's blood within the shoe. The shoe, it is too small for her. The true bride waits for you." The prince looked down and saw the blood streaming from the shoe once more, dripping onto the clean road. He rode back to the house, his patience now completely gone, his face a mask of thunderous rage. He deposited the second false bride at her mother's feet. "This is not the one either," he declared. And then he asked a question that would change everything. "Have you no other daughter?" The stepmother and father hesitated. "No," they said initially. "There is only a wretched, stunted kitchen maid from our late mother, but she cannot possibly be the bride." But the prince insisted. He commanded that she be brought before him, and so Cinderella was summoned. She first washed her hands and face, making them clean. Then she came and bowed before the prince, who handed her the glass slipper. She sat down on a stool, took her foot out of her heavy wooden shoe, and placed it into the slipper. And it fit her, as if it had been made for her. Not a fraction too large or too small. It was a perfect match. And when she rose, the prince looked truly at her face for the first time in the daylight, and he recognized her. He saw the same grace, the same beauty he had seen at the ball, now unobscured by the glamour of a magical gown. "This," he said, his voice filled with a profound and certain recognition, "this is the true bride." The stepmother and the two sisters were horrified. They stood frozen, their faces turning pale with rage and then green with envy as the prince lifted Cinderella onto his horse and rode away with her. Their cruel and bloody deception had been for nothing. The Cinder Maid they had tortured and despised was to be the queen. But the story does not end there. For in the world of these original tales, cruelty is not a thing that is forgiven and forgotten. It is a debt, and that debt must always be paid in full. When the wedding day arrived, the two stepsisters, ever the opportunists, decided to attend. They sought to curry favor with Cinderella, to share in the good fortune that had befallen the girl they had so mercilessly tormented. They walked into the church, flanking the new princess, one on her right side, one on her left, their faces masks of false sincerity. But there were other guests at this wedding. As the procession moved towards the altar, the two pigeons from the hazel tree flew down. They swooped first towards the eldest sister, the one who had cut off her toe. and with a swift, deliberate motion, they pecked out her right eye. Then they flew to the younger sister, the one who had sliced her heel and pecked out her left eye. The sisters screamed, their hands flying to their now bleeding faces, but the ceremony continued. Later, as the wedding concluded and the procession moved out of the church, the sisters, now half blind, stumbled along, still hoping perhaps for some scrap of mercy. But the pigeons had not forgotten. They flew down once more. They went again to the eldest sister, and with that same chilling precision, they pecked out her remaining left eye. And then they flew to the younger sister and pecked out her remaining right eye, and so they were punished. For their wickedness and their falsehood, they were condemned to spend the rest of their days as blind beggars, a life of darkness and sorrow that was a perfect, brutal mirror of the one they had forced upon Cinderella. There is no mention of forgiveness. There is no scene of tearful reconciliation. There is only the cold, hard, and unflinching justice of the natural world. The story ends not with a gentle lesson about kindness, but with a terrifying warning about the price of cruelty. It reminds us that in this old, dark world, wounds demand to be answered, and that some debts can only be paid for with flesh and blood and sight itself. We leave behind the story of Cinderella, her triumph marked by the brutal punishment of her tormentors, and we travel now to another kingdom, another castle, and another young life, about to be consumed by the vanity of a powerful woman. This is the tale of Snow White. Once again, let us first summon the story we know, the gentle myth painted in bright, cheerful colors. It is a world of song where a princess can summon woodland creatures with her beautiful voice. A world where she finds refuge not in a rough miner's hovel, but in a charmingly messy cottage inhabited by 7 comical, kind-hearted dwarves, each with a single, defining personality trait. It is a world where the queen's evil is a simple, theatrical jealousy, and where the deepest sleep can be broken by the pure and simple magic of true love's first kiss. It is a story of innocence, protected, and a love that conquers all. It is a beautiful and reassuring fantasy. But the original story is not about the triumph of love. It is a cold and terrifying chronicle of obsessive, narcissistic rage. It is a story that begins, as so many of these tales do, not with a song, but with a drop of blood. Once upon a time, in the dead of winter, a queen sat sewing at a window with a frame of black ebony. As she worked, and as she looked out upon the snow, she pricked her finger with the needle, and 3 drops of blood fell down upon the white, frozen ground. The red looked so beautiful upon the white snow that she thought to herself, "If only I had a child as white as snow, as red as blood, and as black as the wood of the window frame." Soon after, she gave birth to a daughter who was just as she had wished. Her skin was as white as snow, her lips as red as blood, and her hair as black as ebony. They named her Snow White. But the queen's joy was fleeting. As the child was born, the mother died. A year later, the king took a new wife. She was a beautiful woman, but she was proud and arrogant, and she could not bear to think that anyone might be more beautiful than she. She possessed a wonderful looking glass, a magic mirror. When she stood before it and looked at herself, she would say, "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who in this land is the fairest of all?" And the mirror, for many years, would answer, "You, O Queen, are the fairest of all." And she would be content, for she knew that the mirror always spoke the truth. This was her daily ritual, the foundation of her entire sense of self. Her worth was not in her crown or her kingdom, but in the reflection that stared back at her, a reflection that the world, through the voice of the mirror, had confirmed was perfect. Her beauty was not a feature, it was her religion, and she was its sole, devout worshipper. But Snow White was growing up. And with each passing year, she grew more and more beautiful. Her skin remained as white as snow, her lips as red as blood, and her hair as black as ebony. Her beauty was not a conscious thing. It was an effortless, natural radiance, the beauty of a wildflower, which far outshines the forced, cultivated bloom of a hothouse rose. And so the day came when the queen, now a stepmother, stood before her mirror for her daily affirmation. She asked her familiar question: "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who in this land is the fairest of all?" She waited for the familiar, reassuring answer. But this time, the mirror's voice was different. It answered, "You, my queen, are fair. It is true. But little Snow White is 1,000 times fairer than you." The queen was horrified, her face contorted with a sudden, violent jealousy. From that hour on, her heart turned against Snow White. The very sight of the girl became a physical torment. Envy and pride grew in her heart like dark weeds, higher and higher, until she had no peace, day or night. The foundation of her world had cracked. The religion of her own beauty had been blasphemed. And she knew, with a chilling certainty, that she would not rest until she was once again the sole object of the mirror's praise. There was not room enough in the kingdom for two beauties, and the queen had decided that the other one must be extinguished. The queen's jealousy was not a passing mood. It was a cancer that consumed her thoughts, a venom that poisoned her every waking moment. The knowledge that a child, her own stepdaughter, now held the title of fairest, was an unbearable physical affliction. She could not eat. She could not sleep. She paced the stone halls of her chambers, her mind a whirlwind of hateful schemes, her gaze constantly returning to the magic mirror, as if hoping it might change its verdict. But the mirror was truth, and the truth was her torment. She came to a decision. It was not enough to banish the girl, to send her away where she could not be seen. The source of her pain had to be not just removed, but utterly annihilated. She summoned one of the royal huntsmen, a man she knew was loyal to the crown and obedient to her command. She looked at him, her eyes cold and hard as chips of obsidian. "Take the child out into the deep woods," she commanded, her voice low and steady. "I can no longer bear the sight of her. You are to kill her." The huntsman, though a man accustomed to the brutality of the hunt, felt a chill run down his spine. But he was a servant, and this was his queen. He bowed his head in assent, but the queen was not finished. Her next words revealed the true, horrifying depth of her narcissistic rage. "And when you have killed her," she continued, her voice devoid of any emotion, "you are to bring me back her lungs and her liver as a token of your deed." Let us pause and understand the chilling significance of this command. She did not ask for the girl's heart, the symbolic seat of life often demanded in such dark tales. She asked for the lungs and the liver, and she did so for a specific, monstrous purpose. In the primitive, superstitious beliefs of the time, it was thought that by consuming the vital organs of a rival, one could absorb their power, their youth, their very essence. The queen's intent was not merely to murder her stepdaughter. Her plan was to engage in a ritual of cannibalism. She intended to cook and eat the organs of this 7-year-old child, believing that this grotesque act would mystically transfer Snow White's superior beauty into her own body. This was not just jealousy. This was a madness born of pure, pathological vanity. She did not just want her rival dead. She wanted to devour her very being, to literally consume the thing that had supplanted her. And so, the huntsman took Snow White into the woods. He led her deeper and deeper, into a part of the forest where the trees grew so thick they blocked out the sun. Snow White, in her innocence, skipped alongside him, chasing butterflies. unaware of the terrible purpose of their journey. When they were deep in the woods, far from any path, the huntsman stopped. He drew his long hunting knife, but as he raised it, as he looked down at the beautiful, trusting face of the child, his resolve shattered. He could not do it. His heart rebelled against the queen's monstrous command. "Run," he whispered, his voice hoarse with a mixture of pity and fear. "Run away, you poor child, and never come back." He thought to himself that the wild beasts of the forest would surely devour her soon enough, and so his conscience would be clear of her blood. Snow White, seeing the knife in his hand and the terror in his eyes, finally understood her peril. She turned and ran, her small feet stumbling over roots and stones, the dark trees seeming to close in around her. The huntsman, left alone, was now faced with a new problem. He had to return to the queen with the gruesome proof of a murder he had not committed. As he stood there, his mind racing, a young wild boar came charging through the undergrowth. With the speed of a practiced hunter, he raised his knife and killed it. He then cut out the boar's lungs and liver. They were still warm. He wrapped them in a cloth and returned to the castle. He presented them to the queen, telling her they were the organs of Snow White. The queen, triumphant, did not question him. She took the bloody bundle to the royal cook and commanded that they be boiled in salt water. And that night, the wicked woman, believing she was consuming the very essence of her rival, ate them. She ate them with a grim satisfaction, a cannibal queen, feasting on her own hatred. And when she was finished, she went to her mirror, her heart full of a terrible, confident joy, and she asked her question once more, certain of the answer she would now receive. While the queen feasted on her grim and illusory victory, Snow White was running for her life. The forest, which had seemed so full of light and wonder just moments before, had transformed into a place of profound terror. Every rustle of leaves was a stalking beast. Every crooked branch was an arm reaching out to grab her. The shadows between the ancient trees seemed to hold 1,000 unseen eyes, all watching her. She ran until her lungs burned and her small legs could carry her no further. She ran over sharp stones that cut her feet and through thorny bushes that tore at her dress and her skin. She saw the wild beasts of the forest. She saw a bear, a wolf, a boar, and they ran past her, but they did her no harm, as if even the savage creatures of the woods pitied her desperate plight. She ran until the sun began to set, casting long, menacing shadows across the forest floor. As darkness fell, she knew she could not survive the night in the open. And just as her last sliver of hope began to fade, she saw it. Through a clearing in the trees, she saw a small cottage. Exhausted and terrified, she stumbled towards it. She knocked on the small wooden door, but there was no answer. She pushed it open and peered inside. The cottage was small, neat, and empty. In the center of the room was a little table, covered with a clean white cloth. Upon it were 7 little plates, and on each plate a little spoon, and beside them 7 little knives and forks, and 7 little mugs. Against the wall, all in a row, stood 7 little beds, each covered with a quilt as white as snow. Snow White was so hungry and so thirsty that she could not resist. She went to the table, and from each little plate she ate a few vegetables and a little bread, and from each little mug she drank a drop of wine. She did not want to take all from any one portion, so she sampled a little from each. Then, feeling an exhaustion so deep it was like a physical weight, she looked to the beds. She tried the first one, but it was too long. She tried the second, but it was too short. She tried them all, one by one, until she came to the 7th. It was just right. She lay down, said her prayers, and fell into a deep, dreamless sleep, the first moment of peace she had known since she had looked into the huntsman's fearful eyes. Later that evening, As darkness fully consumed the forest, the masters of the cottage returned home. They were not the cheerful, bumbling figures of our modern tales. They were the 7 dwarves, and they were miners who worked deep in the mountains, digging for ore. They were hard, practical men, their faces smudged with soot, their hands calloused from their work. They lit their 7 candles, and as the small room filled with a warm, flickering light, they saw that someone had been there. The first dwarf said, "Who has been sitting in my chair?" The second said, "Who has been eating from my plate?" The third, "Who has been taking some of my bread?" And so it went, until the 7th, looking at his bed, saw the sleeping form of Snow White. He called the others over, and they all came running, holding their candles high. They peered down at the sleeping girl, their rough faces filled with a silent astonishment. "Oh heavens," they whispered. "What a lovely child." They were so filled with delight that they did not wake her, but let her sleep on in the little bed. The 7th dwarf, whose bed she had taken, slept with his companions in turn, an hour with each, and so the night passed. When Snow White awoke the next morning, she saw the 7 dwarfs staring at her, and she was terrified. But they spoke to her kindly. "What is your name?" they asked. "I am Snow White," she replied. "And how have you found your way to our house?" And so, her voice trembling, she told them her story. She told them of her wicked stepmother, the queen, who had wanted to have her killed. She told them of the huntsman's pity, and how she had run for the entire day through the forest until she had found their little house. The dwarfs listened, their faces growing grim. They looked at each other, a silent conversation passing between them. They understood the danger the child was in, and then they made her a proposition. It was not an offer of charity, but a practical compact. "If you will keep house for us," they said, "and cook, make the beds, wash, sew, and knit, and keep everything neat and clean, then you can stay with us, and you shall want for nothing." "Yes," said Snow White, her heart filling with a desperate gratitude. "With all my heart." And so the bargain was struck. She had found a fragile sanctuary. Her new life would be one of service, but it would be a life. The dwarves would go to the mountains each day to work, and she would tend to the house. But before they left that first morning, they gave her a stern and solemn warning, a warning born of their own simple wisdom. "Beware of your stepmother," they said, their voices serious. "She will soon know that you are here. Be sure to let no one in." Snow White promised she would be careful. She had found a new, strange family, a small pocket of safety in a world that wanted her dead. But the Queen's mirror reached further than any forest, and the peace she had found was as fragile as a pane of glass. The Queen, her heart momentarily satisfied by her gruesome meal, felt her old confidence return. She believed herself to be restored to her rightful place as the most beautiful woman in the land. She preened and she postured, her days once again a celebration of her own reflection. Finally, unable to resist the affirmation she so desperately craved, she went to her magic mirror. She stood before it, her back straight, a smug, triumphant smile on her lips, and she uttered the familiar words. "Mirror, mirror, on the wall, who in this land is the fairest of all?" She waited, expecting the sweet, validating answer, but the mirror's voice was unchanged. It replied, "You, my queen, are fair, it is true, but little Snow White, beyond the 7 mountains, with the 7 dwarfs, is 1,000 times fairer than you." The queen's triumph turned to ash in her mouth. She stared at her own reflection. her face contorting into a mask of pure, murderous rage. She had been tricked. The huntsman had betrayed her. The child was alive. The knowledge was a physical blow, a fresh wave of poison that coursed through her veins. All her scheming had been for nothing. Her peace was shattered, her supremacy stolen once again, and she knew, with a certainty that bordered on madness, that she would have no rest until Snow White was truly dead. This time, she would not entrust the task to another. This time, she would do it herself. Her mind, sharpened by hatred, began to work. She was a woman skilled not just in vanity, but in the dark arts, in the secret knowledge of poisons and subtle witchcraft. She went to a secret, locked room in a remote corner of the castle, a chamber where she practiced her foul magic, and there she began her work. She decided her first attempt would be a deception based on vanity itself. She disguised herself. She stained her face with dark juices, donned the tattered clothes of a poor old peddler woman, and stooped her back until she was unrecognizable. In this guise, she could travel anywhere, her true identity hidden beneath a cloak of poverty and age. She then prepared her weapon. It was not a knife or a poison in the traditional sense. It was an object of beauty, a tool of feminine allure. From a box of trinkets, she took a set of stay laces, the cords used to tighten a bodice. But these were special. They were made of brightly colored, shimmering silk, woven into a beautiful, intricate pattern. They were designed to be irresistible to a young girl, and she imbued them with a dark magic. She traveled for days, over the 7 mountains, until she finally came to the cottage of the 7 dwarfs. She knocked on the door and cried out, in the cracked, reedy voice of an old woman, "Good wares for sale, cheap." Snow White, who was alone in the cottage, peered out the window. She saw the old woman with her tray of goods, ribbons, trinkets, and the beautiful, colourful laces. Snow White, having seen no one but the dwarfs for weeks, felt a pang of loneliness and curiosity. Her heart was good, and she thought, "Surely I can let this honest old woman in." The dwarf's warning, for a moment, was forgotten. She unbolted the door and let the peddler woman in. "Good heavens, child!" the old woman cackled, her eyes glinting. "What a sight you are! Let me lace you up properly for once." Snow White, in her innocence, suspected nothing. She stood before the old woman and allowed her to unlace her simple bodice. Then the queen took the new, magical silk laces and began to thread them. She worked quickly, her gnarled fingers surprisingly nimble, and she pulled. She pulled with all her might. She laced the bodice so tightly that Snow White's breath was squeezed from her lungs. The girl could not draw a single gasp of air. Her face turned a deathly pale, then blue. Her eyes rolled back in her head, and she fell to the floor, as if dead. "Now!" the queen hissed, her voice returning to its own venomous tone. "I am the fairest at last." And with that, she turned and hurried away, leaving the small, still form of the girl on the cottage floor. Not long after, as evening fell, the 7 dwarfs returned from their work in the mines. They saw their cottage door unbolted and were filled with a terrible sense of foreboding. They rushed inside and found their dear Snow White lying on the floor, motionless, not breathing. She was dead. They lifted her up, their hearts breaking with grief. As they held her, they noticed how tightly she was laced. They saw the new, brightly coloured silk cords. Immediately, they took a knife and cut the laces. As soon as the pressure was released, Snow White took a small, hesitant breath, then another, deeper one. A little colour returned to her cheeks, and after a moment she opened her eyes. The first death had been a temporary one. When she was able to speak, she told them what had happened, how the old peddler woman had tricked her. The dwarfs were filled with a grim understanding. "That was no one else but the wicked queen," they said, their voices stern. "We warned you. You must be more careful. Do not let a single soul into this house while we are away." Snow White, weeping with a mixture of relief and shame, promised once again that she would obey. She had been saved from the suffocating embrace of the Laces, but the Queen's hatred was a far tighter and more relentless grip, and she knew, with a new and chilling certainty, that the old woman would be back. The Queen, in her distant castle, hurried back to her secret chamber. Her heart was light, her steps quick. She was filled with a triumphant certainty. The suffocating embrace of the Laces had been absolute. There was no possibility the girl could have survived. She ripped off her disguise, her face flushed with victory, and went at once to her magic mirror. She did not even feel the need to preen. She stood before it, demanding her rightful prize. "Mirror, mirror, on the wall, who in this land is the fairest of all?" She waited for the words that would heal her wounded pride, the words that would restore her world to its proper order. But the mirror's reply was a dagger to her heart. "You, my queen, are fair. It is true. But little Snow White, beyond the 7 mountains, with the 7 dwarfs, is still 1,000 times fairer than you." When she heard this, all the blood rushed from her heart, for she realized that Snow White had come back to life. The rage that filled her was a physical thing, a black, boiling poison that threatened to consume her entirely. "Now!" she shrieked, her voice a terrible, ragged sound. "I shall contrive something that will be your utter ruin." Her first attempt had been crude, a simple application of force. This time, her method would be more subtle, more insidious. It would be a poison delivered not through suffocation, but through beauty itself. She went again to her secret chamber, and using the darkest of her witchcraft, she fashioned a new weapon. It was a comb, but what a comb it was. It was exquisitely made, perhaps from polished tortoiseshell or ivory, its teeth perfectly spaced, its handle inlaid with a delicate pattern. It was the most beautiful comb a girl could ever wish to own, and it was saturated with a poison so potent that a single touch to the scalp would mean instant unconsciousness, a sleep that looked identical to death. Having perfected her new creation, she disguised herself once more, but this time as a different old woman, her face and clothes altered so she would not be recognized. She crossed the 7 mountains again, a journey fueled by a hatred that seemed to give her tireless strength. She arrived at the dwarf's cottage and knocked on the door, crying out in a new, quavering voice, "Good wares to sell! Good wares to sell!" Snow White peered out the window. She saw the old woman and her beautiful things, and despite the dwarf's stern warning, despite her own promise, she could not resist. The comb was so beautiful, so tempting. She thought to herself, "This is a different woman. Surely no harm can come from just looking." She forgot her fear in the face of her desire. The memory of the first attack had faded, replaced by the simple, innocent vanity of a young girl wanting a pretty thing. She told the old woman that she could not let anyone in, but the queen, seeing the girl's eyes fixed on the comb, smiled a sly, knowing smile. "You can at least look," she said, holding up the poisoned comb so it glittered in the light. Snow White was so taken with it that she let herself be deceived. She unbolted the door. Once inside, the queen played her part. "Now, let me comb your hair for you properly, for once," she said, with a grandmotherly gentleness. The poor, foolish Snow White suspected nothing. She sat down and let the old woman run the beautiful comb through her thick, black hair. The moment the teeth of the comb touched her scalp, the poison did its work. Snow White's strength left her instantly. She fell from the stool onto the floor, without a breath, without a sound. She was, for all appearances, dead. The queen looked down at the still form, her eyes gleaming with a final, absolute triumph. "You paragon of beauty," she hissed. Now you are done for." And with that, she turned and hurried away, convinced that this time there could be no mistake, no revival. When the 7 dwarfs returned home that evening, they found Snow White lying lifeless on the floor. They knew at once that the stepmother had been there again. They searched the body, their small hands moving with a desperate urgency. They saw the new, beautiful comb still stuck in her hair. As soon as they pulled it out, Snow White drew a breath, and then another, and she came back to life, her eyes fluttering open as if from a deep sleep. When she told them what had happened, they were beside themselves with a mixture of relief and frustration. They scolded her for her disobedience. "We told you," they said, their voices filled with a fearful gravity. "You must not let anyone in, not a single soul. The Queen will not stop until she has truly destroyed you." Snow White wept, ashamed of her own weakness, terrified by this second brush with death. She had been saved from the poisoned comb, but she now understood the terrifying, obsessive nature of her stepmother's hatred. It was a force that would not be deterred. And she knew, with a dread that settled deep in her bones, that there would be a third time. The Queen arrived back at her castle, her heart a cold, hard stone of certainty. The poisoned comb was a masterpiece of her dark art. Its effect was instantaneous and absolute. There was no antidote, no way to reverse its power. The girl was dead. Her triumph was complete. She went straight to her mirror, her posture radiating a final, terrible arrogance. "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who in this land is the fairest of all?" The mirror's reply was the death of her sanity. "You, my queen, are fair, it is true, but little Snow White, beyond the 7 mountains, with the 7 dwarfs, is still 1,000 times fairer than you." When she heard the mirror speak these words, she trembled and shook with rage. The survival of the girl was a thing of impossible, defiant magic, an affront to her own power. "Snow White shall die," she shrieked, her voice echoing through the stone chamber, "even if it costs me my own life." Her first 2 attempts had been clever, but they had left a path to revival. The laces could be cut, the comb could be removed. This third attempt would be final. It would be a poison that, once ingested, became a part of the victim herself, a poison that could not be taken back. She went to her most secret, most hidden chamber, a room where no one but she ever entered. And there, with the most skillful and wicked arts she knew, she crafted her final masterpiece. It was an apple. But what an apple it was! On the outside, it was beautiful, a perfect specimen. It was white with rosy red cheeks, so crisp and so tempting that anyone who saw it would desire it. But its beauty was a lie. The Queen had engineered it with a terrifying precision. The white part of the apple was perfectly wholesome, but the red half, the beautiful blushing cheek, was saturated with a poison so deadly that a single tiny bite would bring on an instant and irreversible death. When her work was complete, she disguised herself for a third and final time. She took on the appearance of a simple farmer's wife, a peasant woman, her face weathered, her clothes humble. She crossed the 7 mountains and came to the dwarf's cottage. She knocked. Snow White put her head out of the window. "I cannot let anyone in," she said, her voice trembling. "The 7 dwarfs have forbidden it." "It's all the same to me," the farmer's wife replied, her voice friendly and reassuring. "I shall soon get rid of my apples. Here, I will give you one." "No," said Snow White. "I dare not take anything." "Are you afraid of poison?" the Queen asked, her eyes twinkling with a false innocence. "Look, I will cut the apple in 2. You eat the red cheek, and I will eat the white." The apple was, of course, so artfully made that only the red half was poisoned. Snow White longed for the beautiful apple. Her mouth watered at the sight of it, and when she saw the farmer's wife eating a piece of it herself, her suspicion vanished. It was the perfect deception. She could not resist. She took the poisoned half of the apple from the woman's hand. Hardly had she taken a single bite into her mouth, then she fell down, dead. The queen looked at her, her eyes blazing with a horrifying, triumphant glee. A low, triumphant laugh escaped her lips. "White as snow, red as blood, black as ebony wood," she cackled. "This time the dwarves will not be able to wake you again." And she returned to her castle, her heart finally, truly at peace. She went to her mirror. "Mirror, mirror on the wall, who in this land is the fairest of all?" And at long last, the mirror answered, "You, O Queen, are the fairest of all." And so her envious heart had rest, so far as an envious heart can have rest. When the dwarfs came home that evening, they found Snow White lying on the ground. No breath came from her lips. She was dead. They lifted her up. They looked to see if they could find anything poisonous. They unlaced her. They combed her hair. They washed her with water and wine, but it was no use. The dear child was dead, and she remained dead. Their grief was immense, profound. They laid her upon a bier, and all 7 of them sat round it and wept for her, and they wept for 3 whole days. They were going to bury her, but she still looked as if she were living. Her cheeks were still rosy, her skin still white as snow. She looked not like a corpse, but like a beautiful girl who was merely asleep. They said, "We cannot bury her in the dark ground." And so they had a transparent coffin of glass made, so that she could be seen from all sides. They laid her inside it and wrote her name upon it in golden letters, and that she was a king's daughter. Then they put the coffin out upon the mountain, and one of them always stayed by it and watched it. And the beasts of the forest came and wept for Snow White too. First an owl, and then a raven, and at last a dove. For a long, long time, Snow White lay in the coffin. She did not change. She only looked as if she were sleeping. She was a beautiful, tragic monument on the lonely mountain, a testament to the queen's final, terrible victory. And so, Snow White lay in her glass prison, a beautiful corpse preserved for all time, her story seemingly at its tragic end. The queen reigned, secure in her vanity. The dwarfs kept their lonely, silent vigil. The years passed. But fate, in these old tales, is a patient and often clumsy thing. It happened that a prince was traveling through the forest and came to the dwarf's house, seeking shelter for the night. The next morning, he saw the coffin on the mountain, with the beautiful Snow White inside it, and he read what was written upon it in golden letters. He was not struck by a feeling of pity or sadness. He was seized by a strange, necrophilic obsession. He was utterly bewitched by the beauty of the girl in the coffin. He looked upon her not as a person who had suffered a tragic fate, but as a perfect, beautiful object that he must possess. He said to the dwarves, "Let me have the coffin. I will give you whatever you want for it." But the dwarves answered, "We will not part with it for all the gold in the world." But the prince persisted. He begged them. "Then give it to me as a gift," he pleaded, "for I cannot live without seeing Snow White. I will honor her and cherish her as my beloved." His strange, obsessive grief was so great that the good dwarves took pity on him, and they consented. They gave him the coffin. The prince then commanded his servants to carry it on their shoulders and follow him back to his castle. And now, the story reaches its true, unromantic climax. There is no magic kiss, no moment of romantic revelation. There is only a clumsy, human accident. As the servants carried the heavy glass coffin through the woods, one of them stumbled on a shrub. The jolt was so great that it shook the coffin violently, and that single, sharp jolt was enough to dislodge the piece of poisoned apple that had been stuck in Snow White's throat. It fell out of her mouth. For a moment, she lay still. Then she took a breath. She opened her eyes, lifted the lid of the coffin, and sat up. She was alive. "Oh heavens, where am I?" she cried. The prince, full of a rapturous joy, came to her. "You are with me," he said. He told her what had happened and then, without a moment's hesitation, declared, "I love you more than anything in the world. Come with me to my father's castle and be my wife." Snow White, bewildered but grateful to be alive, agreed. And so their wedding was planned with great pomp and splendor. But the story is not yet over, for there is one final act of justice to be performed. To the wedding feast, Snow White's wicked stepmother, the Queen, was also invited. She dressed herself in her most beautiful clothes, stood before her mirror, and said, "Mirror, mirror, on the wall, who in this land is the fairest of all?" And the mirror answered, its voice ringing with a final, terrible truth. "You, my queen, are fair, it is true, but the young queen is 1,000 times fairer than you." The evil woman shrieked a curse, and was at first so terrified she did not want to go to the wedding. But she had no peace. She felt she must go and see the young queen, and when she arrived and saw her, she recognized Snow White at once, and she stood there, rigid with terror and rage, unable to move. But her punishment was already prepared. A pair of iron slippers had been placed in a charcoal fire. They were brought forth with tongs, glowing a terrifying, brilliant red hot. She was forced to put her feet into the red hot shoes. And then she was made to dance. She danced and she danced, her feet burning, her body convulsing in an agony beyond all imagination. She danced before the entire wedding court, a spectacle of pure medieval torture. She could not stop. She had to dance on the searing iron until, at last, she dropped down dead upon the floor. There is no forgiveness. There is no quiet banishment. There is only this final, horrifying image, a testament to a world where envy is a murderous obsession, and where justice is not a quiet verdict, but a screaming, agonizing, and public dance of death. We leave behind the grim spectacle of Snow White's wedding and the terrible justice meted out in red-hot iron. Our final story for tonight takes us away from the grand politics of the royal court and into a small, quiet house on the edge of a deep, dark wood. It is a story that begins not with a queen's envy or a stepsister's cruelty, but with the most mundane and yet most powerful of human urges, a simple, desperate craving. This is the tale of Rapunzel, and like the others, the version we know has been softened by time, its sharp, tragic edges worn smooth until it has become a simple romance, a story of a beautiful girl with impossibly long hair, trapped in a tower, waiting for a charming prince to rescue her. It is a story of love overcoming obstacles, a simple fantasy of imprisonment and liberation. But the original tale is not a romance. It is a tragedy. It is a story about how a moment of profound weakness can lead to a lifetime of suffering, about how a reckless bargain made in desperation can echo through generations. It is a cautionary tale about the brutal consequences of a forbidden love, and it begins, as we said, with a simple, gnawing hunger. Once upon a time, there lived a man and a woman who had, for many long years, wished in vain for a child. Their home was filled with a quiet, unspoken sorrow, the sorrow of an empty cradle. But at last, after so much hope seemed lost, the woman had reason to believe that their prayer had been answered. She was with child. The joy in their small house was a fragile, precious thing. But the journey of new life is often strange, and it began to manifest in the wife as a powerful and unusual fixation. In the back of their small house was a little window, from which they could see into a magnificent garden that was filled with the most beautiful flowers and herbs. But this garden was not a place of welcome. It was surrounded by a high wall, and no one dared to go into it, because it belonged to an enchantress. She was a woman of great power, known in the village as Mother Gothel, a figure spoken of only in whispers. Stories were told of her strange abilities, of the bargains she struck that always seemed to end in sorrow for the other party. She was a creature of immense power, and she was feared by all the world. One day, the wife stood by this window, looking down into the forbidden garden, and her eyes fell upon a bed which was planted with the most beautiful rampion, a salad green with a sharp, peppery taste. In German, this plant is called Rapunzel. It looked so fresh and so green, its leaves glistening with dew, that she was seized by a great and terrible longing. This was no simple hunger. It was an obsession, a sickness of the soul. During the day, she could think of nothing else. At night, she dreamt of it, the taste of the crisp green leaves so vivid it would wake her in a state of desperate, tearful frustration. She knew she could not have it, and this knowledge was a poison. She began to pine away, her joy at her own pregnancy consumed by this strange, unnatural craving. She grew pale and miserable, refusing all other food. Her husband, seeing her waste away before his eyes, grew alarmed. He saw the life he cherished and the new life she carried, both fading because of a simple patch of greens. "What troubles you, dear wife?" he asked, his heart aching. "Ah," she replied, her voice weak with longing. "If I cannot eat some of the Rapunzel from the garden behind our house, I know that I shall die." The husband loved his wife dearly. Her suffering became his own. He was a good man, not a brave one, and the thought of crossing the enchantress's wall filled him with a cold dread. But the fear of his wife's death was greater than his fear of Mother Gothel. He saw the choice before him: face the witch's wrath, or watch his wife, an unborn child, perish. He resolved that come what may, he would get her some of the salad. And so, in the twilight of one evening, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs, he climbed over the high wall into the enchantress's garden. With a desperate haste, his hands trembling, he grabbed a handful of the Rapunzel and scrambled back over the wall to his waiting wife. She immediately made herself a salad from it and ate it with a ravenous, almost feral hunger. It was so good, so incredibly satisfying, that her craving did not subside. It grew. The next day, her longing was 3 times as great as before. The brief taste had only deepened the obsession. If she were to have any peace, if she were to survive her pregnancy, her husband knew he would have to go into the garden once more. This time, the fear was even greater. He had been lucky once, but to trespass again felt like tempting fate to its breaking point. But looking at his wife's pale, determined face, he knew he had no choice. So again, in the twilight, he scaled the wall. But this time, as he landed softly on the other side, his feet touching the forbidden soil, he was met with a sight that made his blood run cold. There, standing before him, her form cloaked in shadow, her eyes glittering with a cold, furious anger, was the enchantress. "How dare you?" she hissed, her voice like the grating of stone upon stone. "How dare you climb into my garden like a common thief and steal my Rapunzel? You shall suffer for this." "Ah," answered the husband, falling to his knees before her, trembling with terror, the stolen greens falling from his grasp. "Let mercy take the place of justice. I only made up my mind to do it out of necessity. My wife saw your Rapunzel from the window and felt such a longing for it that she would have died if she had not got some to eat." The enchantress's anger seemed to soften slightly, but it was replaced by something far more chilling, a slow, calculating cunning. She looked at the terrified man groveling at her feet and saw an opportunity. "If the case be as you say," she said, "I will allow you to take away with you as much Rapunzel as you will, on one condition only." The man, desperate, would have agreed to anything, but the condition she named was a thing of unimaginable cruelty. "You must give me the child which your wife will bring into the world," the enchantress declared. "It shall be well treated, and I will care for it like a mother." In his terror, the man consented to everything. He did not think of the future, of the life of his own child. He thought only of the immediate, terrible threat of the woman standing before him. He made the reckless bargain. And when his wife was brought to bed with a baby girl, the enchantress appeared at once, gave the child the name of Rapunzel, after the salad that had cost her so much, and vanished with her. The price for a simple salad, born of a desperate craving, was the life and future of their own daughter. The husband and wife were left with an empty cradle and a house filled with a silence that was heavier than any grief. The Rapunzel salad, the object of such desperate longing, would now forever taste of ash in their mouths. Their child was gone, swallowed by the darkness of a bargain made in terror. The enchantress, true to her word in one sense at least, did not harm the infant. She raised the child, who grew to become the most beautiful girl under the sun. But the enchantress's care was not that of a mother. It was the care of a collector for a priceless, precious object. It was the care of a jailer for a prisoner he wishes to keep pristine. She saw Rapunzel's burgeoning beauty not as a gift to be celebrated, but as a treasure to be hidden away, to be hoarded, to be kept entirely for herself. The world was a dirty, dangerous place, full of men who might covet her prize. And so, as Rapunzel grew, the enchantress's paranoia grew with her. For 12 years, Rapunzel lived in the enchantress's secluded cottage. It was a strange, isolated childhood. Mother Gothel taught her to sing, to weave, to tend to a garden, all the gentle arts. She was fed and clothed, and perhaps, in her own twisted way, even loved. But it was a suffocating, possessive love. Rapunzel was never allowed to play with other children. She was never allowed to venture beyond the garden wall. Her only companion was the stern, watchful woman who was her entire world. She grew up in a state of profound innocence, with no knowledge of the world, of men, or of the bargain that had sealed her fate. When Rapunzel turned 12 years old, her beauty was so radiant that the enchantress felt a new kind of fear. The girl was no longer a child she could easily hide. She was becoming a woman, and the enchantress knew that the world would soon come looking for such beauty. She decided that the time had come to seal her away completely, to create a prison so perfect that no one could ever find her. She took the girl deep into a forest, a journey that took many days. They traveled into a part of the woods so remote, so wild, that it was said no human had ever set foot there. And in this forest, she had constructed a monument to her own paranoia. It was a high stone tower, so tall it seemed to scrape the sky. It stood in a clearing, silent and imposing, a great stone finger pointing accusingly at the heavens. The tower's design was one of absolute and final seclusion. It had no door, and it had no staircase. At the very, very top was a single small window. This was to be Rapunzel's entire world. When she had brought Rapunzel to the tower, Mother Gothel, with a final, terrible pronouncement, left her there. She would now visit each day, and her method of entry was unique. She would stand at the base of the tower and cry out in her sharp, clear voice, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair to me." Rapunzel was blessed, or perhaps cursed, with magnificent hair. It was as fine as spun gold, and she had never cut it, so it had grown to an impossible length. When she heard the voice of the enchantress, she would unpin her braided tresses, wind them round one of the hooks of the window, and let them fall all the way down the 20 ells to the ground, and the enchantress would climb up by it. This was Rapunzel's life for many years. It was a life of profound and total solitude. Her world was a single, circular room at the top of a stone tower. Her only view was the small patch of sky visible from her window, and the tops of the endless, silent trees that surrounded her. The seasons turned, marked only by the changing color of the leaves she could see in the distance. She had no books, no companions, no knowledge of the world beyond the forest. Her only human contact was with the enchantress, her jailer. And so, Rapunzel lived in a state of suspended animation, a girl frozen at the age of 12, with no past she was allowed to remember, and no future she was allowed to imagine. Her only escape, her only outlet for the growing sense of loneliness that she could not even name, was her voice. She had a voice as beautiful as her hair. To pass the long, empty hours, she would sit by the window and sing. Her songs would pour out of the high window and drift down through the trees, a sound of pure, heartbreaking melody in the deep silence of the forest. It was a song of a caged bird who did not even know it was in a cage. It was a song of a loneliness so profound she did not have the words to describe it. It was a sound of pure, unconscious longing. And it was this sound, this beautiful, sorrowful music, that would one day become the unintentional key to her prison. A call sent out into a world she did not know existed, a world that was about to come crashing into her own. The forest around Rapunzel's tower was not entirely empty. It was a royal hunting ground. The prince of this kingdom was a young man who felt, in his own way, as trapped as Rapunzel. He was weary of the stiff formality of his court, of the endless political maneuverings, of the talk of strategic marriages. He often found more solace in the deep, quiet woods than in his own castle. And so it happened that one day he was riding through the forest, having left his hunting party behind, seeking a moment of solitude. As he drew near the tower, he was stopped in his tracks by a sound. It was a song so beautiful, so enchanting, that he forgot his hunt, forgot his companions, and simply sat upon his horse, utterly captivated. He had never heard anything so lovely. The voice was filled with a longing and a sadness that spoke directly to his own restless heart. It was a sound of pure, untutored emotion, so different from the formal, passionless music of his court. He knew, with a sudden and certain conviction, that he had to see the singer. He spurred his horse towards the source of the sound and soon came to the clearing, where he saw the strange, doorless tower rising up from the ground. He circled it again and again, examining it from all sides, but he could find no way in. The song poured from the small window at the very top, a tantalizing and unreachable source of beauty. The prince was frustrated, but he was also entranced. The singer was a mystery, a beautiful enigma locked away from the world. The song had taken root in his heart, and he could not leave. He returned home to his castle, but the singer's voice haunted him. It was a melody that played on a loop in his mind, a sweet and sorrowful ghost that gave him no peace. And so, every single day, he would make an excuse to leave the castle. He would ride out into the forest and sit near the tower, just to listen. He would sit for hours, hidden amongst the trees, his own heart aching with a strange new feeling, a mixture of wondered desire and a deep, empathetic loneliness. He began to feel a connection to this unseen singer, a kinship of two lonely souls in a world that did not understand them. One day, as he was standing thus behind a tree, his heart aching as he listened to a particularly sorrowful melody, he saw an old enchantress come to the tower. He watched as she stood at its base, her presence casting a long, dark shadow in the afternoon light. and he listened, his breath held, as she called out in her sharp voice, "Rapunzel! Rapunzel! Let down your hair to me!" The prince watched, his eyes wide with astonishment, as a long, magnificent braid of golden hair cascaded down from the high window. He saw the old woman grab hold of it and climb up, disappearing through the opening. He now had the key. The secret of the tower was revealed. A ladder of pure gold, a living staircase woven from the hair of the mysterious singer herself. His heart pounded with a new excitement, a thrilling sense of purpose. He now knew how to reach his enchanted songbird. He would wait for his chance. He waited until the next day, as dusk began to settle over the forest, casting long, gentle shadows. He rode to the tower. He had memorized the enchantress's words, and he had practiced her call. He stood at the base of the cold stone, looked up at the high window, and trying to make his own voice sound as much like the old woman's as he could, he called out, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair to me." For a moment, there was silence. Then he saw it. The magnificent, thick braid of golden hair began to unfurl from the window, falling down, down, down the side of the stone tower, until its end rested on the ground before him. It was real. He took a deep breath, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. He took hold of the thick, silken rope of hair. It was soft, yet incredibly strong. And he began to climb. He climbed up, hand over hand, his gaze fixed on the small, dark window above, the destination of his quest, the source of the music that had captured his soul. He was about to enter the cage, and he had no idea of the consequences that would follow for them both. When the prince reached the top of the tower and climbed through the small window, Rapunzel was at first terribly frightened. She had never seen a man before, other than in her vague, dreamlike memories of her father. The only human face she knew was the stern, wrinkled face of Mother Gothel. This stranger, with his kind eyes and his handsome features, was a creature from another world, a world she did not know existed. She saw him, and she trembled, scrambling to the furthest corner of the room, her heart seizing with a terror that left her breathless. But the prince did not approach her as a conqueror. He began to speak to her gently, like a friend. He told her of how her song had so captivated his heart that it had given him no peace, and how he had spent days just listening from the forest below. He spoke to her not as an object to be possessed, but as the source of a beauty that had moved him deeply. His voice was kind, his words were gentle, and as Rapunzel listened, her fear began to melt away, replaced by a new and unfamiliar feeling. For the first time in her life, she was being seen not as a possession, but as a person. For the first time, she was hearing a voice that was not filled with commands or criticism, but with admiration and a soft, gentle warmth. This handsome young man was a revelation, a window opening onto a world of feeling she had never known. His presence filled the small, lonely room with a new kind of magic, a magic far more potent than Mother Gothel's. And as they spoke, as he told her of his own world of castles and courts, and as she, hesitantly at first, told him of her lonely existence, a powerful bond began to form between them. He described the colors of a royal festival, the taste of spiced wine, the feeling of dancing in a great hall. She, in turn, described the patterns the sunlight made on her floor, the different songs of the birds she could hear from her window. They were two people from different universes, sharing their small, precious truths. The prince, seeing that her fear was gone, and feeling his own heart captured by her profound innocence and beauty, asked her if she would take him for her husband. And she, looking at this kind, handsome man, and thinking that he would love her more than the old enchantress, who had been her only and often cruel companion, consented. She said, "I will willingly go away with you, but I do not know how to get down. Bring with you a skein of silk every time that you come, and I will weave a ladder with it. And when that is ready, I will descend, and you will take me on your horse." And so their secret life began. It was not a chaste, innocent courtship. It was a passionate and clandestine affair. The prince, having won her heart, became her regular visitor. They arranged that he should come to her every evening, for the old enchantress came only by day. Imagine the quiet routine of their forbidden love. Each evening, as the sun set, Rapunzel would wait by her window, her heart filled with a thrilling anticipation that was entirely new to her. She would see the prince emerge from the shadows of the forest below, and her heart would leap. She would hear his familiar, gentle call, and she would let down her golden hair, her heart singing a song far more joyful than any she had sung in her loneliness. He would climb to her, and the small, cold stone room would be transformed. It was no longer a prison, but a secret sanctuary, a world created for just the two of them. Here, in the soft glow of moonlight filtering through the high window, they were not a prince and a prisoner. They were simply a man and a woman, exploring the dizzying, terrifying, and beautiful landscape of first love. He would bring her stories of the outside world, and in turn, she would sing for him, her voice no longer a sound of loneliness, but of joy and love. Their meetings were a secret world of whispered words, of shared laughter, of a tenderness and intimacy that neither had ever known. For a long time, they lived this way, their secret a fragile, beautiful bubble, suspended high above the world in their lonely tower. Mother Gothel knew nothing of it, for the prince came only after she had departed. Rapunzel, once a creature of pure, sad longing, was now a woman filled with a new and vibrant life. She was happy, she was in love, and in her innocence, she believed that this secret, stolen happiness could last forever. She had no understanding of consequence, no knowledge of the terrible price that such a love would inevitably demand. Time, in the isolated world of the tower, seemed to lose its meaning. The days were still long and lonely, spent in the company of Mother Gothel, a period of quiet endurance. But now they were merely a prelude, a necessary waiting period before the true part of her life could begin. The evenings were a secret paradise, a stolen handful of hours filled with the prince's gentle voice, his warm touch, and the intoxicating thrill of their shared secret. Rapunzel, in her profound innocence, had no real concept of deceit. Her life had been one of simple obedience and solitude. Now, it was a life of profound duality. She had to learn to wear a mask for the enchantress, to feign the same quiet, listless obedience as before, while her heart was secretly singing with a joy she had never known. This new, complex emotional landscape was a difficult one for a girl who had never had to hide anything before. She was happy, and her happiness was a dangerous, radiant thing that threatened to betray her at any moment. Perhaps there was a new light in her eyes that Gothel might notice, a new confidence in her voice. Every day became a small performance, a careful dance of concealment. But the greatest threat to their secret was not a slip of the tongue or a careless glance. It was a simple, unavoidable biological truth, a consequence of their nightly affair that Rapunzel, in her complete ignorance of the ways of the world, could not have possibly foreseen. Their love had borne fruit. She was pregnant. For weeks, she noticed the changes in her own body with a quiet, childlike confusion. She felt a strange new tiredness, a morning sickness she could not explain. She noticed a new roundness to her belly. And then, there was the most damning evidence of all. Her clothes, the simple dresses that had always fit her loosely, were beginning to grow tight around her waist. Even then, in her naivety, she did not understand the true meaning of these changes. She had no mother to confide in, no sister to ask. The world of men and women, of love and its consequences, was a closed book to her. And so, one day, in a moment of pure, guileless innocence, she sealed her own fate. Mother Gothel had come to the tower as usual. She called out, and Rapunzel, her mind perhaps distracted by thoughts of the prince's coming visit that evening, let down her hair. The enchantress climbed up. As she entered the room, Rapunzel spoke to her without thinking. The words were not meant to be revealing. They were a simple, casual observation, a puzzle she could not solve on her own. "Tell me, Mother Gothel," she said, her voice full of innocent curiosity, "how is it that you are so much heavier to pull up than the young prince? He is with me in a moment." A deep, profound, and terrifying silence filled the small stone room. The words hung in the air, an unwitting, an absolute confession. In that single, simple sentence, the entire secret world that Rapunzel and the prince had built came crashing down around them. Mother Gothel stared at her, her face at first a mask of disbelief. Then a slow, dawning horror crept into her features, followed by a flush of crimson rage. Her eyes, which had always been hard, now seemed to burn with a cold, black fire. She understood everything in an instant. The prince, the nightly visits, and the reason for the girl's tight-fitting clothes. The treasure she had hidden away from the world had been found. Her perfect, pure songbird had been defiled. Her prize had been stolen from right under her nose. "Ah, you wicked child!" she shrieked, her voice a terrible, ragged sound that echoed off the stone walls. "What is this I hear of you? I thought I had separated you from all the world, and yet you have deceived me." The betrayal she felt was absolute, her fury beyond measure. Rapunzel, seeing the look on the enchantress's face, finally understood the catastrophic nature of her simple question. She shrank back, her body trembling with a terror she had not felt since she had first seen the prince. But there was nowhere to run. There was no escape. The cage had just become a torture chamber, and the door had been slammed shut not by her jailer, but by her own innocent, unguarded words. Mother Gothel's rage was not a thing of words. It was a physical force, a storm that broke upon Rapunzel with a terrifying, absolute violence. In her fury, she grabbed Rapunzel's magnificent braids, the very instrument of the betrayal, the golden ladder that had allowed the prince into the tower. She wrapped the thick, silken tresses around her left hand, holding them fast. And in her right hand, she took up a pair of shears. Snip, snip. The sound was sharp and final in the silent room. With a few brutal, unceremonious cuts, the work of years was undone. The magnificent hair, the pride of the tower, the golden ladder to a secret love, fell to the floor in a sad, shimmering heap. It lay there, lifeless, a symbol of everything that had just been destroyed. Rapunzel could only watch in stunned, silent horror, her hands flying to her shorn head. The source of her beauty, her identity, was gone. But this was only the beginning of her punishment. Mother Gothel was so pitiless, her heart so hardened by her perceived betrayal, that she did not stop there. She grabbed the weeping, terrified Rapunzel by the arm, and, through some dark magic, she cast her out. One moment, Rapunzel was in the familiar stone room of her tower, the only home she had ever known. The next, she was in a place of utter desolation. She was banished to a desert, a wilderness, a great and terrible wasteland, far from any human habitation. It was a place of endless sand, of thorny shrubs, and of a merciless, burning sun. Here, in this harsh and unforgiving landscape, she was left to fend for herself. There was no shelter, no ready source of food or water, and she was not alone. She was with child, her body growing heavier, her needs more urgent. In this place of profound misery and loneliness, she gave birth to her children. In some versions a son, in others twins, a boy and a girl. She was forced to endure the agony of childbirth utterly alone, with no one to help her, no one to offer a word of comfort. Her life became a grim struggle for survival. She lived on what little she could find, roots, berries, the sparse and bitter offerings of the wasteland. She drank from stagnant pools of water. She slept in the shelter of rocks, clutching her newborn infants to her chest for warmth against the cold desert nights. The beautiful girl who had sung in a tower was now a ragged, starving outcast, her life reduced to the most primal, desperate needs: to find enough food to stay alive and to keep her children alive with her. This was her punishment. Not a quick, clean death, but a slow, grinding and lonely existence, a life of profound wretchedness and misery. Meanwhile, back in the tower, Mother Gothel, her rage still burning, prepared for the final act of her revenge. She was not content with punishing Rapunzel. She would destroy the prince as well. She took the magnificent severed braids of golden hair, the ones that had fallen to the floor, and she fastened them securely to the hook by the window. And then she waited. Like a spider in her web, she sat in the dark, silent room, the severed hair of her victim in her hands, and she waited for the prince to come calling. She waited for the man who had stolen her treasure, ready to deliver a poison that was not for the body, but for the soul. As dusk fell, the prince arrived at the tower, his heart full of the familiar, sweet anticipation of seeing his beloved. He knew nothing of the catastrophe that had unfolded. He stood at the base of the tower, looked up at the window, and called out the secret, intimate song that was his alone. Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair to me. Inside the tower, Mother Gothel heard him. A cruel, triumphant smile spread across her face. She took the severed braids, the dead, golden hair, and let them down from the window. The prince, seeing the familiar cascade of gold, suspected nothing. He took hold of the hair and began to climb, his mind filled with thoughts of his love, of the children they would have, of the life they would one day lead together in freedom. He reached the top and pulled himself through the window, expecting to be met with Rapunzel's embrace. Instead, he was met with the terrifying, hate-filled face of the enchantress. He stared at her, his mind reeling in confusion and a dawning, sickening dread. "Aha!" she cried, her voice a venomous sneer. "You would fetch your dearest, but the beautiful bird sits no longer in the nest and sings no more. The cat has got it and will scratch out your eyes as well. You have lost Rapunzel. You will never see her again." The words struck the prince with the force of a physical blow. The world tilted, the floor seeming to fall away beneath him. The thought of a life without Rapunzel, the horror of her fate at the hands of this monster, was a pain so absolute, so profound, that it overwhelmed all reason. In his despair, in his utter, all-consuming grief, he did the only thing his shattered mind could think to do. He let go. He threw himself from the high window of the tower, choosing death over a life without his love. He leaped. He did not find the clean, quick death he sought. His fall was broken by the thick, thorny bushes that grew at the base of the tower. He survived the fall, but the thorns, sharp as daggers, did their work. They pierced his eyes, blinding him completely. His punishment was not to be death, but a life of darkness, a living hell that mirrored the desolation of his own heart. He was now a blind beggar, stumbling through the forest he had once ridden through as a prince. He ate nothing but roots and berries, his fine clothes turning to rags, his body growing thin and weak. And for years he wandered this way, in a state of profound misery, doing nothing but weeping and lamenting for his lost, beloved bride. He would wander from place to place, his empty eyes staring at a world he could no longer see, his ears filled with the echo of a song he would never hear again. Eventually, after years of this aimless, sorrowful wandering, he stumbled into the desert where Rapunzel had been cast out. He was a broken man, a ghost of his former self, calling out her name into the empty wilderness. One day, Rapunzel, who was living nearby with the twins she had borne, a boy and a girl, heard a voice. It was a familiar voice, one she had heard only in her dreams for many long years. She followed the sound and found him. She saw the ragged blind man, and she knew him at once. She went to him, and when he felt her arms around him, he knew her. She wept as she held him, and 2 of her tears fell upon his eyes. In the magic of these old tales, a tear shed from true love can be a potent thing, and as her tears touched his blind eyes, they grew clear again, and he could see as he had before. He took her and their children back to his kingdom, where they were received with great joy, and they lived for a long time afterwards, happy and contented. It is a hopeful note on which to end. A reunion, a healing, a semblance of a happily ever after. But we must not let this final, miraculous moment erase the years of suffering that preceded it. We must remember the reckless bargain born of hunger, the lonely tower, the brutal punishment, the stolen hair, the desolate wilderness, and the blind, weeping prince. For the true lesson of this tale is not that love conquers all. The true, darker lesson is that a moment of weakness can birth a lifetime of consequence, and that the road back from despair is a long, dark, and often sightless journey. And so our long journey through the twilight of folklore comes to its end. We have walked the dark and tangled paths of these old tales, and we must now step back into the quiet of the present. But we do not return unchanged. The familiar, comfortable landscapes of our childhood memories have been redrawn, their gentle hills replaced by jagged peaks, their sparkling rivers now running dark and deep. We have stripped away the silken robes and the glittering crowns of the stories we thought we knew, and we have found the raw, bleeding flesh beneath. Let us stand here for a moment, at the edge of the woods, and look back upon the grim procession we have just witnessed. It is a catalogue of horrors, a testament to a world that was far crueler and far stranger than we ever imagined. We began with the tale of Cinderella, a story we remembered as one of gentle virtue rewarded. But we found a reality written in blood and pain. We discovered that the famous slipper was not a prize to be won, but a test to be cheated. We witnessed the chilling spectacle of a mother commanding her own daughters to mutilate themselves, to slice off a toe and a heel, all for the promise of a crown. We felt the grim satisfaction of a justice that was not about forgiveness, but about retribution, as we watched the vengeful birds descend from their tree to peck out the eyes of the wicked, leaving them blind to the world they had so desperately coveted. From the cinders of the hearth, we travelled to a queen's cold stone castle, and to the story of Snow White, a tale we recalled as a simple victory of innocence over vanity. Instead, we found a terrifying chronicle of obsessive, narcissistic rage. We uncovered the queen's true, monstrous intent, not just to kill her rival, but to engage in a ritual of cannibalism, to devour the child's lungs and liver in a mad belief it would grant her beauty. We saw her relentless, murderous campaign, the 3 distinct and cunning attempts on Snow White's life, the suffocating stay laces, the lethally poisoned comb, and finally, the artfully poisoned apple. We learned that Snow White's awakening was not the result of a magical kiss, but a clumsy, accidental jolt. And we were forced to witness the story's final, brutal act, not a simple defeat, but a prolonged and agonizing execution, as the queen, her feet shod in red-hot iron, was forced to dance a fiery, screaming jig of death at her victim's wedding. Finally, we climbed the lonely tower of Rapunzel, a story we remembered as a simple romance of imprisonment and rescue. And here, we found a quiet, heartbreaking tragedy of consequence. We saw how a parent's desperate, reckless bargain could condemn a child to a life of utter isolation. We learned that the prince's visits were not a chaste courtship, but a secret, passionate affair that resulted in an unintended pregnancy, revealed by the most naive of questions. And we witnessed the brutal, swift punishment that followed this discovery, the shearing of the magnificent hair, the banishment of the pregnant girl to a desolate wilderness, and the prince's despairing leap from the tower, a fall that did not grant him the mercy of death, but only the cold, hard darkness of a blind man, doomed to wander for years, weeping for a love he could no longer see. This is the true legacy of these tales: mutilation, cannibalism, torture, unwanted pregnancy, blinding and brutal, unforgiving revenge. This is the world that has been hidden from us, the grim reality that has been papered over with cartoon animals and cheerful songs. And so we must confront the vast, unbridgeable chasm between the stories we were told and the stories that were first written. The lie of the nursery is a powerful one. It presents a world that is fundamentally just, a world where problems are simple and solutions are magical, where the greatest punishment is a mild scolding or a brief period of social ostracism. It is a world designed to reassure us, to make us feel safe, to promise us that our own goodness will be seen and rewarded. But the world that birthed these original tales offered no such reassurance. It was a world of profound uncertainty and ever-present danger. It was a world where justice was a rare and often brutal thing, where survival was a daily, grinding struggle, and where a happy ending was a statistical improbability. The people who first told these stories around a smoky fire in a drafty hut were not trying to create comforting fiction. They were trying to distill the harsh wisdom of their own lived experience. They were crafting tools for survival. The stories were not meant to be aspirational. They were meant to be cautionary. They were a raw, unfiltered education in the brutalities of the world. They taught that vanity and envy are not simple character flaws, but monstrous, consuming forces that can lead to murder and self-destruction. They taught that youthful passion, unchecked by wisdom, can lead to catastrophic, lifelong consequences. They taught that cruelty is a debt that will, sooner or later, be repaid in kind, often with a horrifying interest. They taught that the world is full of tricksters and deceivers, and that an innocent heart is a vulnerable one. The darkness in these tales was not for entertainment, it was for instruction. It was a way of inoculating children against the very real horrors that awaited them outside the cottage door. They were meant to instill a healthy fear of the dark woods, of strange bargains, of the envy of powerful people. They were a way of saying, the world is not a safe place. Be careful, be vigilant, do not be foolish, for the price of foolishness is often pain, and sometimes it is death. We have sanitized these stories because our own world has become, for many of us, a much safer place. We no longer need to warn our children about the very real possibility of a famine or the danger of being eaten by a witch in the woods. And so, we have kept the princesses and the castles, but we have scrubbed away the blood and the tears. We have kept the romance, but we have erased the consequences. We have turned these grim survival guides into pleasant, meaningless fantasies. In doing so, perhaps we have lost something. We have lost a connection to the raw, untamed power of these original tales. We have lost their terrifying honesty, and we have lost their profound respect for the darkness that is an undeniable part of the human experience. We leave these tales where we found them, in the dark woods of the past. They remind us that before happily ever after, there was often just after, a world of pain, consequence, and brutal truth. The stories were not created to ensure sweet dreams, but perhaps to arm children for the nightmares of the waking world. For those of you still with me, for those who wish to venture into the deepest, darkest part of the woods, we have one final story. It is a tale so grim, so filled with a cold and patient horror, that it is often left out of the collections entirely. It is a story of a jealousy that curdles into an unimaginable act of violence, and of a justice that is as brutal as the crime it seeks to answer. This is the tale of the juniper tree. Long ago, there lived a rich and pious man who had a beautiful wife. They loved each other dearly, but they had no children, and this was their great sorrow. In the courtyard before their house stood a juniper tree, and one day in winter, the wife stood beneath it, peeling an apple. As she peeled, she cut her finger, and 3 drops of blood fell upon the snow. "Ah," she said with a heavy sigh, "if only I had a child as red as blood and as white as snow." As she spoke these words, she was filled with a sudden, joyful hope, and in time, she gave birth to a little boy whose skin was as white as snow and whose cheeks were as red as blood. When she saw him, she was so overcome with joy that she died. Her husband mourned for her deeply, but after a time, he took a new wife. This second wife gave him a daughter, a little girl named Marlinchen. But the new wife, though she loved her own daughter, grew to despise her little stepson. She saw him as an obstacle, a reminder of the first wife, the one her husband had truly loved. Every day her jealousy grew, and the devil put it into her mind that she should kill the boy, so that her own daughter might inherit all the father's wealth. Her heart became a cold, hard stone. She treated the little boy with a terrible cruelty, pushing him from one corner to another, pinching him here and cuffing him there, so that he lived in a state of constant fear. One day, the stepmother went to her great wooden chest, a heavy thing with a massive iron-bound lid. Her daughter, Marlinchen, came to her and said, "Mother, may I have an apple?" "Yes, my child," said the wicked woman, and she opened the chest. The chest was filled with beautiful red apples. As Marlinchen took one, the stepmother's plan, a thing of pure, sudden malice, took shape. "My dear," she said to her daughter, "would you like another?" Just then, the little boy came running in from the garden. The devil was whispering in the stepmother's ear, and she said to him with a false kindness, "My son, will you have an apple too?" But as the little boy leaned over the open chest, his small head and shoulders disappearing inside to pick out the finest apple, crash! The stepmother slammed the heavy lid down with all her might. The iron lock struck the boy's neck, and his head was severed, falling among the red apples. A wave of terror seized the woman. What had she done? She thought to herself, "How can I get out of this?" She went to her room, took a white cloth from her drawer, and with a horrifying practicality, she set the boy's head back on his shoulders, tying the cloth around his neck so that nothing could be seen. She then carried the small, still body to a chair by the front door and placed an apple in his hand. Marlinchen, having finished her own apple, came to her mother. "Mother," she said, "my brother is sitting by the door, and he looks so pale. He is holding an apple, and when I asked him to give it to me, he did not answer." It frightens me." "Go to him again," said the wicked woman, "and if he will not answer you, give him a box on the ear." Marlinchen did as she was told. She went to her brother and said again, "Brother, give me the apple." When he remained silent, she struck him on the cheek, as her mother had commanded, and the boy's head fell from his shoulders to the floor. Marlinchen was seized with a terror so profound she began to shriek and cry, and she ran to her mother. "Oh, mother," she wailed, "I have knocked my brother's head off." The stepmother looked at her, her face a mask of cold calculation. "You wicked girl," she said, "what have you done? But be quiet, and no one shall know of it. It cannot be helped now. We will cook him into a stew." And so, the wicked woman took the small body of her stepson and, with the detached efficiency of a butcher, she chopped him into pieces. She put the pieces into a pot and cooked him into a sour stew, a black pudding. Marlinchen stood by, weeping without pause, her small body shaking with horror and grief. Her tears fell into the pot, so there was no need for any salt. Later that day, the father came home from his work. He sat down at the table and said, "Where is my son?" The stepmother, her face a picture of false hospitality, served him a great steaming dish of the black stew. She said only, "He has gone across the country to his mother's great-uncle. He will be staying there for a while." The father suspected nothing. He was hungry from his day's work. "How is it that I will not see him before he goes?" he asked. But his mind was already on the food before him. He began to eat. "Wife," he said after the first few bites, "this food is delicious. Give me more." And the more he ate, the more he wanted. He declared it was the best stew he had ever tasted. He ate and ate, throwing the bones under the table until he had devoured the entire dish. He felt a strange, profound satisfaction, a feeling of having been perfectly and completely nourished. And he did not know that he had just feasted upon the flesh and blood of his own son. Marlinchen, meanwhile, could not eat. She could not speak. She could only weep. She watched in silent horror as her father consumed her brother. And when the meal was over, when her father and mother had gone about their evening, the grieving little sister went and gathered up every single one of the bones from under the table. She found her finest silk handkerchief, a small beautiful thing of blue silk, and she carefully placed all the bones inside it. She tied it up into a small, neat bundle and carried it outside, weeping tears of blood. Her heart was a cold, heavy stone in her chest. She went to the courtyard, to the juniper tree that stood before their house, the very tree under which her brother's mother had once wished for his life, and with her bare hands, she dug a small hole in the earth amongst its roots. She laid the silk handkerchief with her brother's bones inside it, and she covered it with earth. She did not say a prayer. Her grief was too great for words. But as soon as she had buried the bones, a strange thing happened. The profound sadness that had been crushing her spirit suddenly lifted, and though she still wept, she felt strangely light and free, as if a great burden had been taken from her. She looked up at the juniper tree, and the tree began to stir. It shivered and trembled, its branches moving back and forth, parting and coming together again, as if it were a person clapping their hands for joy. And from the center of the tree, a mist began to rise, and in the center of the mist, a fire seemed to burn. And from that fire, a beautiful bird flew out, and it rose high into the air, singing magnificently. And when it was gone, the juniper tree was just as it had been before, and the silk handkerchief with the bones was gone with it. Marlinchen felt as light and as happy as if her brother was still alive, and she went back into the house, sat down at the table, and ate. The bird that had flown from the juniper tree was the spirit of the murdered boy, now transformed into a creature of beauty and vengeance. It flew to the nearby town and landed on the roof of a goldsmith's workshop. And it began to sing. Its song was clear and beautiful, but the words were a story of pure horror. It sang, "My mother, she killed me. My father, he ate me. My sister, little Marlinchen, gathered together all my bones, tied them in a silken handkerchief, laid them beneath the juniper tree. Kiewit, Kiewit, what a beautiful bird am I. The goldsmith, hearing the song, was so captivated by its beauty and its strange, terrible words that he ran out into the street. "Bird," he cried, "sing that song for me again." "No," said the bird, "I do not sing for nothing. If you give me that golden chain you are making, I will sing it again." The goldsmith, so enchanted was he, agreed at once. He gave the bird the beautiful golden chain, and the bird sang its song once more. Then it took the chain in its claws and flew away. It flew to the house of a shoemaker and perched upon the roof, and it sang its song again. "My mother, she killed me. My father, he ate me." The shoemaker heard it and ran to the door in his shirt sleeves. He looked up at the bird, his face filled with wonder. "Bird," he said, "how beautifully you sing. Sing that song for me again." "No," said the bird, "I do not sing for nothing. You must give me those red shoes you are making." The shoemaker, mesmerized, did as he was asked. He gave the bird the pair of fine red shoes, and the bird sang its song again, then took the shoes in its other claw and flew away. Finally, it flew to a mill and perched upon a linden tree, and it sang its song a third time. The miller's men heard it and stopped their work, listening to the strange, sad story. The miller himself came out and asked the bird to sing again. "No," said the bird, "I do not sing for nothing. Give me that heavy millstone, and I will sing it again." The miller's men thought this was absurd. "Yes," they said, "if you can carry that, you can sing again." It took all 20 of them to heave the great, heavy stone up. The bird simply put its head through the hole in the center and flew away with it, as if it were a feather. And now, its 3 prizes gathered, it flew back home. It flew back to the house with the juniper tree. Inside, the father was sitting by the fire. He suddenly said, "Ah, I feel so happy. I feel so light and free, as if I am about to see an old friend." But the wife said, "No, I feel so terrified. My teeth are chattering, and I feel as if there is fire in my veins." She paced the room, her heart filled with a terrible dread. Marlinchen simply sat in a corner, weeping. Then the bird landed on the juniper tree and began to sing its song. "My mother, she killed me." The stepmother clapped her hands over her ears, but the sound was like thunder. The father stood up. "My father, he ate me." "Oh, wife," cried the father, "what a beautiful bird. It sings so splendidly. I must go out and see it." "No, no," she screamed. "Don't go. I feel as if the whole house is shaking and on fire." But the father went out, and as he did, the bird dropped the golden chain around his neck, and it fit him perfectly. He was filled with joy and went back inside. The bird sang again. "My sister, little Marlinchen," Marlinchen cried, "I too must go out and see if the bird will give me something." And as she stepped outside, the bird threw down the red shoes to her. She put them on and was suddenly light-hearted and happy, and she danced back into the house. The bird sang its song one last time. "Laid them beneath the juniper tree. Kiewit, Kiewit, what a beautiful bird am I." The wicked stepmother felt her terror become unbearable. Her hair stood on end like flames of fire. "I must go outside," she thought. "Perhaps I will feel better." But as she stepped out the door, crash! The bird let the heavy millstone fall directly on her head, and she was crushed to a fine dust. The father and Marlinchen, hearing the sound, rushed outside. But there was only a great cloud of smoke and fire rising from the spot where the stepmother had been. And as the smoke cleared, the little boy stood there before them, whole and beautiful once more. He took his father and his sister by the hand, and the three of them, their sorrow finally at an end, went back into the house, sat down at the table, and had their dinner. And here, our journey into the dark must end for tonight. We leave these tales, and their ghosts, to the silence of the past. Thank you for listening. Sleep well.